everybody from the Galiano Island Library who's worked so hard to set this up for me, to have my first ever public speaking event in my life. Thank you for coming. The last time I did this, I was in grade 12 English class, and I had to defend Piggy from the Lord of the Flies in front of everybody in some sort of mock trial. And I was terrified and shaking the whole time. So I gave it up until now at 40. So here I am. So thank you for everybody for having me here. And yeah, I'm actually starting with a reading. Should I do that, Jack?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I'm going to start just reading from the beginning of Astra. It is, for those who haven't read the book, it's a novel told in 10 different people's perspectives about one woman. So this first chapter is from the perspective of Astra's father, Raymond. But Astra is not born yet. So I'm just going to read the first page and a half, and then we'll start our chat.
Can it be louder?
I can try. Is that better? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Raymond Brine doesn't want to think about the coming baby. He doesn't want to think about it or about Gloria or his role in it all. He doesn't want to think about a creature so mewling and helpless, not about its cord, its first cry, or its delicate newborn skin. He doesn't want to think about shared blood or familial lines or humanity's relentless compulsion to overpopulate this weary planet either. What he wants to do is work, to toil away on celestial farms' lands with his comrades under this vast expanse of sky, to focus on soil, irrigation, crop yields, and building more housing for the commune. But this baby is coming as fast as a hurtling comet, and already it's made a mess of everything. Gloria arrived with the influx of spring workers in March, and after a long winter alone in the one-room fur cabin that he built his first winter at the farm, Raymond found himself drawn to her quick laugh and broad shoulders, so he let her spend a few nights in his bed. When it soon became clear that she was interested in more, he requested she move into the yurt with the others, carefully explaining that he didn't believe in monogamous relationships, that he treasured his independence, that he never planned on being tied down. Gloria cited this as the reason she kept the pregnancy from him until June, and why she announced the news publicly during the morning breakfast meeting rather than talking to him one-on-one. After the women finished their congratulations, running their fingers over her small, taut belly and kissing her full cheeks, Raymond pulled her aside to explain yet again that he wasn't that kind of man, not the kind who got married or provided or believed that A and B led to C. He wasn't going to move to the city, cut his hair, get a job in a bank or some other bullshit like that. He wasn't going to buy a house or a stroller because on and on it would go. He'd been called to Celestial for a reason, and nothing was going to distract him or slow him down. If Gloria was hoping he'd build a family with her, or that she'd get a declaration of love, she'd set her sights on the wrong man. Despite Raymond's unwavering stance, Gloria stuck around Celestial all summer long. Sometimes she searched him out by the river or in the gardens, or she bravely knocked on his cabin door to show him a sweater she'd crocheted for the baby, or to update him on the kicks she felt at night. When he encountered her like this, both vulnerable and stubborn, Raymond looked anywhere but into her wide, hazel eyes and pointed out that it would be better if she left and got her mother's help. He had no business getting involved with her child. Our child, Gloria reminded him firmly. If you say so, he said, closing the door.
Okay. Oh, is mine working?
No.
Sorry.
Check. Okay, there we go. Wow. That's so awesome. I thought, so we're gonna, well, we talked about the book a little bit before now, but we're gonna now publicly chat about the book, which is a little strange, but I think going to be really nice. But I thought of asking first before we start, maybe just a show of hands or something. Well, you don't have to, but who, I don't want to give spoilers. Does it matter? Does anybody care about that? Are they really like, they don't want me to say things that happen. Okay, I can try to avoid, or we can try to avoid specifics, maybe.
No specifics.
No specifics?
Only vague, yeah. We won't use any character names.
What a great book. Yeah. It was really
We'll
nice.
try our best, yeah.
No, we'll try our best. I just thought we'd get the feel for that. I was chatting about the book with Virginia last night, and Dave is partway through reading it, and all of a sudden I was launching into a thing about a scene, and he was like, I haven't read that yet. So, right. So maybe, but I thought a good place to start might be with the scene of the place where you read the opening about Celestial Farms, which is this this sort of farm commune piece of land, which is set in BC, in the north of BC. It feels like. But it sort of feels also like it could be lots of different places. There are a lot of these types of utopian societies, especially in BC, places where people go and try to set up like an alternative to normal, whatever that is, normal life, and make a go of it out there in the wilderness, and back to the land. And I have a feeling, so this really resonates with me, and I feel like probably a lot of us, who maybe grew up in a city and then moved to somewhere not a city. So but one thing that I noticed about, Raymond especially as a character is he wants to keep that world out, very strongly, with these fences around what he believes is. He wants an independence, a sort of from all that, which is so beautifully, what is it, all that bullshit, as we say. But then, it made me think there isn't really such thing, or is it even desirable? I think one of the questions the book asks is, is there such thing as independence? Can you be separate from all this, from the world and from relationships, and is it even possible or desirable? And so I guess I was wondering a little bit about where how you came to this to creating Celestial Farms. How did it emerge in your writing process, this place, this?
Yeah, well, growing up on Galiano, there was a lot of people who had lived sort of in intentional communities or communes or various places, and I didn't really notice it until I left. And when I left and I mentioned where I grew up and I mentioned how some kids had grown up, everybody was shocked when I thought it was totally normal. So I started to get more and more interested in that, and about kids who grew up in more extreme, urban or commune type situations or intentional communities. So in my 20s, I did all this research on children who had grown up in some of the more famous communes in the States.
Okay.
And I got all these papers, and I thought maybe one day I would become a radio host person who would make podcasts. So it was before podcasts, so I'd do radio interviews or documentaries. And I liked the idea of talking to different kids and kind of seeing where they went afterwards and how that kind of shaped them. So it was an interest of mine then, and then when I started trying to write short fiction, I found myself writing a story about a man who lived on a commune and was having a kid, and it just kind of was there. And so it was just where I started, and then I was like, well, I'll just do this fictionally. I'll think of a woman who grew up in this situation and see where she goes. So that was sort of the impulse, was more studying that and being interested in that earlier in my life.
Right, and it's it's just so alive. There's so many, all these characters connected to Celestial are just so beautifully drawn. They really feel like real. They feel like real people, that because they're so familiar. And there's sort of this tragedy to Celestial. It's not. It starts out with such nice ideas, and it sort of it just but at least some of them I know of in BC, it tends to not work out to have like, to fully reinvent the wheel or something when it comes to society. Like, and I think we could all maybe identify with it even on smaller scales. Like, I remember houses I lived in East Vancouver where it was sort of like everyone's, just crashing in this house, and there's like 17 people in a house that built for 6, and it's all going to work out because everyone's going to share and contribute, but like it doesn't actually really work out that way in reality often.
Yeah.
Certain personalities tend to dominate. There's sort of like this. So Celestial, like a lot of these places, is like a microcosm of of society and
relationships, I think.
relationships.
So Raymond is like somebody who says he wants to live communally and he wants to create this beautiful utopia, but he's still the boss. And so I think that was often the common theme when I did this research on it here, is there's always still one driving person, and if people didn't follow behind them, then it kind of would all crumble. And so, Celestial Farms doesn't ever really become much, and that's not a spoiler. It's just, it's a community, and then it just becomes a guy on some land. So, and it also is a lot, because he starts it with his best friend, Doris, who's another character in the book, and they really have this idea together. But as he starts to take more control, she becomes less and less interested in being involved with the farm. And you can kind of see that as a loss in the book, because you can see she has reason and warmth and all these other things that Raymond doesn't really have. And so that I just wanted to do it. I know in bigger communes or in bigger intentional communities, it would be a team of 20 people. But of course, in a novel, that would be hard to keep track of. So I just wanted to put those sort of 2 people side by side and just be in a small little group. Yeah.
One of the things I love is that you have a relatively small group of people here, but that allows us to see all that, like, go deep into each one's connections with, with their family members. Like it's amazing when I was looking back over it, how many generations you fit into a book that's not super long. Like, but there are so many. We learn about Charles Bryan. We learn a good deal, through a few different people's eyes. Raymond's father, and we work our way all the way down to Hugo's new daughter, and it's amazing. And so we, and even the smaller characters, I loved how they. I'm thinking of peripheral characters throughout the book, not like those right central to Celestial or Astra's life, but we even you just paint their family lives really richly, and that is I think a wonderful thing. There's like it's really hard. Okay, so one of the things I think about this book, and I guess any novel, but it was hard to look at it and think about what I would ask about Astra, because she is so. I wouldn't want to reduce in any type of way, because you actually need every single word in this book to see the entire picture as it is, and she's still kind of a mystery.
Yeah, she's left.
Yeah.
We still don't know her, and that was sort of the point of the structure of the book as well, because you get to know different sides of her, but you also get to question who's more right about who she really is. Is her dad right? Is her son right? Are everybody combined right? Is nobody right? And you kind of are left not knowing her. Just like I liked to imagine that if I heard about somebody my entire life from all these different people, but I never actually met them. So I heard about them from their mother and their sister and a boss, and I never saw them. What would I think of them? And it would be very hard to pin that person down. And so I kind of did that, even though she's the main character. So that was sort of the idea of the structure.
And it's sort of what I love about it is that it says it's showing us that we, I think, at core aren't just a fixed being. We're not a fixed character that can be summed up. We move through time, and we have all these relationships, and we are different people to the different people around us. So it says something really profound, I feel, about the nature of the self, actually, about the nature of our personalities. Yeah.
I feel like when I was writing Astra, it was right after I'd had my youngest son. And so I was looking ahead at the next, 40, 50 years of work life and wondering, can I reinvent myself? Who do I want to kind of become at this new kind of turning over point? So she's sort of reinventing herself and becoming a different person to other people in each chapter. And I was seeing if I could become a new person and write a book, even though I didn't know that, like 5 years before that, I would have never guessed that I would have written a book. So,
Right.
and I love that about people when they turn over and have new jobs and transform themselves. And it's one of my favorite things to watch, or when I see my friends and family do that, I think it's really beautiful. So I wanted her to have the freedom to do that in the book.
Yeah, and I feel like even the book gives us permission to, I think, to be that way and to reinvent ourselves. Like it's that, it's such a powerful statement about that. I think that's one of the beautiful side effects of the book, is it sort of makes us think of ourselves as less fixed, which I think might be helpful if we're going to reinvent ourselves in some way. And so how did that, when you were going through this process of, I guess, or how did those decisions line up for you as to, I'm definitely gonna turn this into a novel, or like, and make it, yeah, how did that come about?
Yeah, it was kind of awkward. I mean, I started with one short story and it was very, very bad. It was the Raymond chapter, but he laid on a bridge the entire story as it was snowing, and he was high on magic mushrooms, and he was thinking about parenthood, and there was no movement in it was quite bad. But I got from the beginning to the end, and then I was like, I'm going to try a completely different story. And I started writing about a girl who lived on a commune, and she was it was because it was in the 80s, she was growing some weed for spending money. And it was also quite bad. There was helicopters, there was fires, it was very dramatic. But at some point during writing those two stories, I realized that this girl was that guy's daughter. And then I rewrote everything. And once I had those two, and then I wrote one more, I was like, I think I could turn this into a book about one person. So it took a bit of time to get to the structure. I mean, the structure also really helped because I was at home with two small kids. At this point, I hadn't told anybody I was writing because I was quite, like, it wasn't what I was supposed to do, or I hadn't been trained. It was like I did it during naps and I kind of snuck it in here and there. But that structure of working on one character at a time was like I could bite that off. I could focus on one chapter, and then once I was done with that one, I could focus on another one. So it was a really great way to learn how to write different characters, and to be able to think, like when your brain is foggy and you're doing 100,000 things. Yeah.
Just sort of focus in on one at a time.
Yeah.
I noticed that in the beginning of each chapter, the voice is really clear. Like, I love how when we're with Brendan or Lauren or one of these people that Astra comes into Astra's life, I love how the first couple pages are just like that person. It's like coming into focus, and all of a sudden you're like, and in a very sympathetic way. So we actually, I found I really got on board with each character, until sometimes about 3/4 of the way through that chapter or so, and you're like, wait a second, this might not be a good person. But then by then you're like, oh, but I know them so well. I feel icky. But yeah, it's wonderful how it draws us in. I mean, did you that whole nature of voice is I think that's one of the things that makes the novel really successful. And how do you approach that when you're writing a chapter like that? Say someone, pick anyone, but like someone who's not you, and you're wanting to really bring us into that person's head and worldview. What is that process like for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't really know what it's like for me. I love doing it. I love thinking of somebody and thinking about why they're difficult, or why they're angry, or why they bottle anger in a certain way, or who they need to control. Because in Astra, there's a lot about people trying to kind of move her into positions they want her to be in, to kind of control her a little bit. And so it's kind of fun to go into somebody's head and try to think about why they would want to change somebody, or why they would be violent, or why they would be really emotionally manipulative, or and I don't really know what the process is. I mean, I read a lot, and I'll see a very unlikable character and they're my favorites. I love unlikable characters because they're so complicated, and so that was always inspiring to see how people do it, and to often through each chapter or through each character there were certain characters, literary characters I had read that I had kind of pin them towards, like they're going to be like this character sort of, and I could kind of look at how they did it, or
like models.
Movies are good too.
Some scaffolding for these characters a bit. Cool. I just think there's that's what part of what makes it, and really the book is, I looking back at it again, I sort of thought, is it really about Astra, or is Astra just an excuse for us to like learn about each of these other people? Like in some ways, how they feel about Astra says way more about them than it does about her. She is in the whole thing.
Yeah.
But going chapter to chapter, it's like this person says something about Astra or has this experience with her. The next person might have a completely opposite thing that they say about Astra or reaction, and it really shows what they're like, what that person is like, more so than what. So it's like what Jen always says that her mom said to her as a kid, when you're pointing your finger at someone, there's three pointing back at you.
For
it's
sure.
kind of like that. Every chapter is like that. So it's a wonderful and so. Oh, when you mentioned it being a convenient forum for being, a parent as well, and you're trying to write in between things, the busy life, as I know, of having kids, that brought into my mind also that there's tons of great parenthood stuff in the book, like the parent-child relationships are so well drawn and so interesting and so real. Just things from everything from the birth stories to the sort of late in life parent-child relationship, and but especially the Astra and her son Hugo. I feel like that it really seems to change Astra. What her relationship with Hugo is like, all consuming and all transforming, it seems like, too.
Yeah, and I think so. I kind of thought of Astra as somebody who lacked a lot in her childhood. She didn't really have guidance. Raymond wasn't really there. And so when she left, sort of one of the reasons why she keeps getting involved with people who are kind of controlling, I think, is because she's always been looking for boundaries and for people to tell her no and for people to guide her. So she wasn't quite sure who she was, but she also wanted somebody to observe her and tell her what to do, because she'd been craving it her whole life. So I feel like that's why she kept walking into kind of one kind of difficult situation after another, and then she'd be with those people for a while and be like, actually, no, I don't like this sort of control over me.
Yeah.
But then when she has her son, she is able to finally have somebody she can love and who will not leave her, and it's a very important and quite intense relationship for the both of them. And I think that who Astra is, that's the natural response, I think, to having a father like Raymond.
Right. And he's and so Hugo, or anyway, Astra's son, also ends up kind of being like, after a while too, like you're like, just stop smothering me, mom, or whatever, because they have this super close relationship. So close that the other characters in the book sometimes find a little weird and off-putting even, but it's like, and it's beautiful. But of course there's this theme through the book of like younger generations pushing away what their parents kind of wanted, the life that their parents set up so carefully for them.
Yeah.
We
all try so hard. I just imagine how my kids are going to push me away. I just like, it's going to be so fascinating.
Yeah, it's like, it only takes every ounce of all your time and energy and love through, as to set all these things, to be a parent. And then of course that's exactly the thing that they need a break from. So
Totally.
so I understand. But I think so that's one of the things that I find makes the book feel really big too, is that, and like, it feels like one of these intergenerational sagas or epics or something in a way, because each generation so epically flops from the previous one into this like totally other way of doing life. And one of the other kids who grows up on Celestial, named Freedom, right, he has his way of totally rejecting that lifestyle, and Astra has her way of doing that.
And I think it wasn't just because they grew up on a commune or in that type of childhood. I think, people change patterns after their parents grew up in wartime, or they,
Right.
in the 50s, like suburban America, people threw that away with like punk music, and like everybody's always pushing and re-examining the way they grew up and kind of making slight changes. And I like to think about how sometimes things are lost though when you do that. Like, you may be throwing the baby out with the bathwater a little bit each time you refuse something, and it's very hard to keep the things you want and to change things. And I just find that endlessly interesting, and it's been going on for thousands of years. So this was just one small window from 1970 to whenever the book ends. I don't remember the exact year I have in my head, but yeah.
But it's true, isn't it, that like, that's because you feel a bit for each of these characters as they're rejecting their parents' lifestyle. You feel like, you're like, there's, because then they're gonna have to make a lot of the same mistakes over again, or they're gonna have to make new mistakes, I guess, because they're in a new context. But like, and we see it with like Raymond and Doris, kind of rejecting their parents' thing to want to set up Celestial Farms, and so I don't know. I think it's wonderful that you show these characters without judgment, and they're so empathetically written. I feel like that we're able to look at the choices of them and feel all the feelings, all the complex kind of feelings about their choices without judgment, and it's just a wonderful. So that's really awesome. I mean, so I have a million things that I love about the book. That's one of it. I thought one of the things that you do really bravely in it too is looking at gender roles over like a lot of different contexts, and in one point even, what is it? I think it's Doris. It just comes out and says it, like, all these, what was Celestial even for, like all these ideals, what was feminism even for, like, it's still at the end of the day the women are doing all this hard work with raising kids, and the guys have these ideas and ideals, and you show how these characters, they don't have the same kinds of choices available to them often.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that those were, to be clear, specific characters had that anger and resentment. I think there's obviously many people who lived in utopian situations or intentional communities, or people from that generation who gender roles were really equal and kind of sorted out. But in this particular group of people, it sort of was a lot of women ending up without homes, with taking care of kids and they're constantly trying to find housing security, and they have children that they're taking care of. And it was it's always been a thing that's been happening, and it happened definitely in the 70s and 80s, I think, for women too, who, often lived out of vans or whatever,
like Chloe and is that the right way to pronounce?
Clodagh.
Sorry, I thought it was like, I was saying Chloe in my head. Sorry, I because I thought maybe it's a weird silent D.
The Google Pronounce actually taught me how to say it properly. So.
Anyway, she's a great example of someone who's just she is doing her best in that context, and these characters are really trying their best.
And that was kind of my one thing. And I feel like the next project I'm working on, I'm going to do the same thing where I just want to give everybody housing security towards the end of the book. It's like, I've noticed it's a theme. Like, I just want them to get a house and to just have a house and everything will be fine. Even if their life is still a mess and they have family problems, who cares? They have a home to go to and they'll get a good night's sleep. So
Oh God.
I've noticed that I've done that now quite a few times and I'm wondering if I'm ever going to stop. So that's a spoiler for my future books.
We should do. We can do the launch at the new affordable housing when it comes out. We'll do the book launch there. It'll be a tied-in thing. So, that brings me to. It makes me think of the chapter called Lauren, where Astra moves in to this basement suite in Vancouver, and I thought that was that whole chapter really was like a great portrait to me of this sort of precarious situation that people are in terms of housing. Like, there's Lauren's family lives upstairs, and they're like, and Astra's living down, in the basement as live-in caregiver and cleaner a little bit, and just how their families are so similar in some ways, but yet are like worlds apart in other ways because the power difference there is huge. And so do you want to maybe read a bit from that chapter and then we can talk about it?
Yes, we did pre-plan this, so just so you know. So it's like, yes, I will. It's right here in Marvel.
That was so. I did
You
it so
did a really good
casually.
job, but I felt like I was going to be fake. But you've done such a good setting up the chapter. So yes, in the perspective of Lauren, she and her husband are looking for a nanny who is going to be Astra. Where they have a basement suite they want to give in lieu of some of the pay, and I'm just going to read a little bit from when they first meet Lauren and Astra. Astra is younger than Lauren, but not terribly so. She has a plain, unkempt beauty, dark where Lauren is blonde, slim where Lauren is round. A faint scar cuts through her lips, along her jaw, and into her stringy hair. The line splits her face asymmetrically, like in a Picasso, making it hard for Lauren to get a complete picture of who she is. Her faded tank top hangs over her sharp sternum and small chest, and she has a bushel of keys clipped to the belt loop of her ripped jeans. Clearly, Astra is not dressed for a job interview, but Lauren figures there are worse failings. Lauren places her work satchel on the ground, suddenly feeling silly for bringing such a thing to a park. "It's hot out," she says, searching for a way to begin. "Yeah," Astra replies lazily. As their feet shuffle in the overrun grass, eyes chasing their children, Astra quickly delves into her rental troubles, and Lauren commiserates by describing her and Brett's renovation horror stories and the nightmare contractors they've dealt with over the years. They worry together over grade 3, fingers crossed their sons will luck into teachers who understand their quirks, and they wonder if the boys might end up in the same class at some point. Astra speaks casually and slowly, not with the clip that Lauren is used to from the women at her law office, and she finds herself trying to imitate Astra's intonation. Lauren may come across as confident, but it's never been easy for her to meet new people. After what Lauren is surprised to learn is almost an hour of chatter, nothing about references or the job or the basement suite, the boys run up and complain they're thirsty, sweat sticking their hair to their brows. Lauren starts to dig in her satchel for Charlie's water bottle, but before she finds it, Astra tells the boys to go back across the park and see if the fountain is working. The women watch their sons, arms outstretched like airplanes, sprinting below the huge maples, trying to outdo one another with their imitation of machine gun fire. And again, Lauren is struck with emotion. The truth is, she doesn't make it to the park very often. She doesn't have much time to spend with her child, and he's so quick on his feet now. The boys are taking turns at the fountain, filling their mouths and spitting water at one another. Astra laughs. "It's better to be this far away, because that almost looks cute from here even though it's clearly disgusting." They watch as Hugo bends over the faucet again, then his head jolts back and he is screaming. When Astra takes off across the field towards them, Lauren picks up her satchel, clutches it to her chest, and jogs along awkwardly behind. Nearing the fountain, she sees blood running down Hugo's chin. He keeps crying, "Look at all the blood! Look at all the blood!" Astra drops to the ground, pulls her son into her lap, and lets him drip all over her shirt, apparently unbothered by the stains that will be left behind. The boy clings to his mother as she whispers in his ear, but it's impossible to catch what she says. Throughout this, Charlie busies himself by twisting the toe of his sneaker in the grass while peering at his friend with scientific interest. Lauren can't help but find his behavior embarrassing. Why isn't he showing any sympathy? Is this normal? Watching Astra and Hugo again, she tries not to count back to when Charlie last clung to her this way, with his cheek buried in her neck. She tries not to ponder the link between her inadequacies as a mother and the lack of compassion her son is displaying. Hugo's tooth cut his lip. That's all, Astra explains to Charlie after a brief examination. Mouths insist on being dramatic. They always bleed more than they should. Lauren likes the way Astra reassures her son, as if the blood is as hard for him as it is for Hugo. She smiles, reaches out, and pats Charlie's shoulder. All she wants is to touch him, to comfort him too, but he shifts away from her hand. Lauren exhales. Well, at least Astra doesn't seem to think her son is a fledgling psychopath. Once the blood stops and Hugo wipes his eyes, the boys return to the slide, and Lauren points across the street to their grand, sky-blue Victorian. We live right there. Yeah, we've been over once, Astra says. Lauren feels her skin flame. Really? Brett didn't mention that. Hugo needed to go number 2. He won't use public washrooms. It's a thing. Oh dear, Lauren laughs, when really she doesn't know how to feel anymore. She'd begun to like this woman, liked how she handled the boys. She'd begun to think Brett was right all along, but here is that fear again. I must see them together, she decides. I must see how Brett looks at this woman, and then I'll know what to do.
It's so good. That whole chapter is like, it's like a train wreck in slow motion. You know, it's just not gonna end well. It's like, and the whole thing, every little clue along the way is like, But of course, Astra doesn't really have much choice. She doesn't have really anywhere to go, and so it's like and there's this sort of very glib kind of judgment that comes from Lauren about Astra and her way of, and her shortcomings or whatever, but also this admiration for her emotional connectedness with her son and jealousy kind of, and it's all those things all together. So you show these, but they really, really do come from different power, places in a spectrum of power dynamics. So it's a fascinating sort of look at housing insecurity, at class, and Vancouver is like particularly bad for that. So it's the perfect mise en scene for that type of thing.
I remember Vancouver. We left right before the Olympics when things got quite wild with housing.
Yeah, and so it's just, so you have this perfectly. I love their sort of I love Lauren's sort of like, horror stories, but they have this house that's like amazing and so beautiful, and right across from the park, and like Victorian beautiful house. It's that's the kind of thing, and so of course they're not speaking the same language really. They're kind of in different worlds, but they but Lauren, in fact, the part that you read from, just to go back to what I was saying before, that was what really, the way she feels about her son is what made me really, really sympathize with her too, and that like she's working all the time, she's trying her hardest in this particular mold of what it means to be successful, to have a high-powered job, and to be working at it all the time, and to have a house and a family and be in control. And she is doing those things, but she really, the trade-off is this sort of lack of connection with her kids, and I mean, there may be other reasons for relationships, but I'm really trying not to give too much away here. But yeah, I think I just love how Lauren is probably my favorite character in the book because she's both. I really, really, really feel for her and hate her at the same time. So it's really wonderful.
I've had quite a few messages where people are just like, Lauren's the worst.
Oh yeah.
Just like straight up, I'm like, yeah, Lauren's the worst.
Yeah.
Totally.
But I do love her.
But I feel
But
Yeah.
in itself, it could make a movie about that chapter.
just that scene.
Because there's such a suspense in that chapter. I mean, I was sitting on the edge of my chair. It's like, what's going to
That's right.
happen?
And her husband is one of these guys throughout the book who's like, this is really awesome. These men in your book that are like, some of them are really bad, but all of them are. A lot of them are not. Like I think of Brett, Lauren's husband, and Nick who comes later in the book, as being these sort of subtle manipulators. Like there's a sort of Raymond at least is like very clear about the fact that he's gonna do what he's gonna do, and he doesn't want anyone to and that he's not gonna have some woman tell him what to do. But these guys too do it but sort of sugarcoat it, and you wrote those characters really well too. I feel like they're in our lives, and that's something that I guess as a man reading it, I was like, oh, okay, like maybe I probably do that sometimes. Like this, I should, where you think you're being good, maybe, but like really got to look at like why you're doing the things you're doing. Like I think, anyway, I hope that it's like this book should be like a men's studies, men's group book or something too. Like guys should get around, sit in a circle, and talk about the characters in this book. Like, which one are you? Maybe we could do like a role-playing a play or something like that. Anyway, but because these are almost like tarot cards of like different male archetypes in relationships, and so it's very, but seeing them all reflected back, it's wonderful, and yeah. So I don't know if that was an intention for you in the book, but it is, I think, another wonderful part of the book.
I don't think it was intentional. I mean, I think everybody in the book is pretty manipulative, so including all of the women characters,
Right.
all have some sort of agenda, and they want to prove something through Astra or turn her into something they want, or they're jealous, like Lauren, or like Sativa, even though she looks up to her, she's also jealous of her. Doris, who's kind of like, I think of as sort of the heart of the book, the one like kind of, I don't know, she's like my safe place kind, but even still, she can't quite see herself, and so she's trying to manipulate Astra to do certain things so that she can get what she wants, but she can't quite see what she even wants, and so she needs Astra to shine that mirror back in her face. So you're right, though, there's manipulative men, I agree, but I also think there is women who do that as well. So I didn't intentionally go, I'm going to make all the men super manipulative and all the women are going to be wonderful. So,
I think
that wasn't my plan.
Right. I mean, it read, though, really like what I think comes through in the later part of the book, though, too, which I loved, is that these men in the last couple of chapters are really, you sort of see these like guys getting it wrong a bunch of times, or at least and then we see guys in the last few chapters, and the women too, I guess, making these baby steps towards true connection and relationship, and like it's sort of nice. There's nothing. It's not bombastic. It's not like crazy fireworks going off, but it is really amazing that just trying to be real and present in relationships with each other, and those little moments of connection really are everything. They really are.
Yeah, and as Astra's aging, I was putting her, I kind of felt like she needs to choose who she spends her time with a little bit better as she gets older. So the men she's involved with, or there's this Nick character that comes later, without many spoilers, but he is actually a pretty emotionally intuitive guy. He really wants to talk about feelings and family and past, and he wants to connect with her, but yet he also needs to control her emotions at the same time. He wants to be in charge of that emotional truth telling.
I hate him.
but
I
you're
just
like-
gotta say, I really don't like him. The
But
way
you're
he just like reframes a thing for himself, like instantly, like, you know, if something doesn't go the way he wanted it to go, he'll just be like, okay, no, this, and he just like in his head like retells the story in his own, so it makes him look good, like each time.
Yeah, he definitely does do that. But he was really fun to write in that way because I feel like that's pretty normal. And I had sympathy for him too, even though, because you're like, oh, if you could just work a little bit harder, like Astra's really receptive to she's able to have a relationship now, so if you could just be a little less controlling. So that's why it's a very frustrating chapter, because they're so close to working, but yet can't still work. So that was sort of the baby steps.
Astra is very irritating too. She
Oh,
drives
she's
me up
quite
the wall.
irritating.
Astra's irritating
She
too.
attracts all this. She's searching for this. I always
She's
wanted
very
to get
frustrating.
angry.
Yeah.
I wanted to get angry, and she's never screaming at anyone. And it's like, what's going on? I mean, wake up and take charge of yourself.
Yep, she doesn't
So
do that.
She was an irritation for me. Another irritation in this chapter. Another irritation. It's like, stand up.
Yeah, and she's a bit like her father that way too. I think that he's very passive, and that's passiveness is a manipulation as well.
Yeah.
And so she was like, would get herself in these situations. She didn't have to be in any of these situations, but she is there, and that is on her as well, of course.
Yeah, and definitely a learned thing from her father's way of doing things, I think too. Yeah. I don't know. Do we want to maybe open it up to Q&A, or is there anything?
'Kay.
Yeah. So, how would we like to do it? Maybe if you have a question, just to stand up and say it loudly so everyone can hear. Does that work? Okay.
That's good.
I have a question. What's the part of the decahedron in the story? It seems to connect the whole thing, and we don't really know what it is at the end. But it's not a bit unusual. It's really kind of interesting. It adds a lot of intrigue.
Yeah, well, I like the idea of there being a symbol. Actually, that was, for a long time, that was what the book was called. It was called the Decahedron, and it wasn't named Astra. But then my agents and editors were like, that sounds like a very inaccessible math book. That's a terrible idea. Do not call your book the Decahedron. So I think that actually changes the reading experience of Astra, too, because it didn't used to be like, this book is about Astra. It was... Astra was a main character. So I do think that changing the name skews it changes kind of your perspective about what the book is going to be. But I think it does work better. But the decahedron is a 10-sided dice, just a small item. My kids had lots of dice. They played Dungeons and Dragons, and so they had the decahedron. And I like there's 10 chapters. So I like the idea that there was just this physical...
So it is a complicated math book.
It is a complicated math book, yes. All to do with the number 10. So the idea that there was 10 sides to the story, 10 faces to Astra, 10 different opinions on who she is, and then this idea of chance and Raymond and Astra too, put off responsibility of their choices, which we were just talking about. And so I like the idea of there being something that they put all that responsibility onto, like people do with tarot or with horoscopes, so I just wanted to create something that was just theirs. So that's how it came to be as a kind of theme.